In this video, we're going to be looking at two-dimensional arrays, the basic introduction, how to set one up, so how to declare a two-dimensional array, and then how to fill it with data and do a basic calculation using a 2D array. Now, before we actually start with the Delphi, let's have a look at this little depiction. In the top there, in orange, I've depicted a very simple, normal, quote-unquote, one-dimensional array. These are the arrays that you would have learned in grade 11. You can see here I've done a simple declaration of a one-dimensional array. You should recognize it. The name of the array, 1, 2, 3, so 3 elements of type string. Now, when we declare a one-dimensional array like this, all that we are making mention of is the number of elements that we want. 1, 2, 3. So this one will be element 1. We can even label it. This will be element 2, and that will be element number 3. Each element is a column. So this is actually the first column, this is the second column, and that's the third column. There's no mention made of rows here because a one-dimensional array will only ever have one row, one horizontal row, and each element is a column. This is important because when we move down to two-dimensional arrays, and here we have a depiction of a two-dimensional array, it has multiple rows and multiple columns. Over here, I've done a very simple declaration of a 2D array, and we will look more at how to declare a 2D array when we move to Delphi. But you can see here we've made mention of 2 ranges instead of 1 for the one-dimensional array. This one is also of type string, so it's the same. It's just more like a table. Here we specify how many rows we want, 1 to 5, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and how many columns you want, 1, 2, 3. The declaration of the 2 arrays are almost identical except for the fact that the two-dimensional array, we have to specify how many rows we want as well. In the one-dimensional array, we don't make any mention of rows because, again, there's only ever one row. But with the two-dimensional array, we now have multiple rows. So it makes like a grid or a table type of factor. Now, in order to illustrate this, we're going to make use of this little interface. What this program is doing is it is capturing the attendance of a high school through all the grades, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12, for each class. Now, to keep things simple, I'm only going to have 3 classes per grade, and we're going to call that class A, B, and C. So 8 ABC, 9 ABC, all the way up until 12. In this button here, BT and Read, we are going to capture the attendance for each class in each grade and fill the array. And in BT and Show, we are going to display a simple calculation based off of that data, showing how many students attended per grade for a particular day. Okay, we can ignore these things over here. We're not going to use them. So let's start by reading data into the array. Now, before we can do that, we need to declare our two-dimensional array. So I'm going to do that. An array can be declared as a global or local variable, but by default, I'm going to use it as a global because we are going to use this array in 2 separate procedures. Now, we can do it underneath the private section, or we can just do it underneath the VAR. Either way works, all the same, but we'll do it over here. So we start with the name of the array. Now, just so that we are aware that this is going to be a 2D array, we start with ARR2 and then give it a name. We'll just say ATT for attendance. It is an array, but what are the elements? how many elements are we going to use? So there's a general rule. You always first declare the number of rows. This is the same for arrays, always, for 2D arrays, the number of rows first. So we are going to have 5 rows. Why? Because one for each grade. 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. That's 5, so 1 to 5. Then we separate it with a comma. Now we need to specify how many columns we would like. Now I could say 3, 1 dot dot 3, because we know we're going to have 3 classes per grade, A, B, and C. But just like with normal arrays, normal one-dimensional arrays, you can use a char to specify the number of elements as well. So let's do that, because this is an example, so let's get used to it. A to C. That's also 3. It's the same as 1 to 3, except we are labeling these columns as A, B, and C instead of 1, 2, and 3. The data type of our array is going to be integer because we are storing the number of students per class, per grade. And that's it, ladies and gentlemen. Our 2D array is declared. Very similar to a one-dimensional array. We're just adding one extra element here, one extra parameter to our array, which is the number of rows. So 5 rows, 3 columns. Now we can proceed. Now with our one-dimensional arrays that we're used to, when we fill an array, we usually use a loop, a for loop, because we can say we want to loop from 1 up until the maximum number of elements in the array, or however many elements we are making use of. So with the 2D array, it's similar. We are going to use for loops. However, because there's not just columns, there's also rows, we need to use a nested for loop. Let us begin. So with arrays, we always start with the row first. So I'm going to create my variables, I row, because that's 1 to 5. That's an integer. And my column, C column, I'm going to make that a char because we're going to be counting A, B, and C. So for I row, always the row first, is equal to 1 to 5 do. There we go. And with my nested for loops, it can become confusing. I want to keep track of my begins and my ends. So I'm going to say end of I row. That's the outside loop. So inside there, we're going to declare a second for loop. This one is going to be C col. All right, so in case you had forgotten, we can use chars to loop through a for loop as well. So we're going from A to C. Here we go. And we're going to keep track of this end as well. You can see how indenting our code makes it so much easier to read, especially when you're having nested items, nested for loops, nested if statements, things like that. It makes it so much easier to read and keep track of. So please do that, indent your code. All right. Now, how we're going to fill this array is we are going to use input boxes. Every single time an input box pops up, it's going to fill one row at a time, like that. So A, B, C, then it will move to the second row, A, B, C, third row, A, B, C, until it reaches the 5th row, and it's completed all of that. So each row is a grade, each column is a class A, B, or C. So AR2ATT, what element number are we dealing with? Right, so again, we can't just say, okay, we are dealing with 5 or 2, because this is a 2-dimensional array. We have to specify what row and what column. Fortunately, this is actually really simple. It's almost the same every single time when you're using nested for loops. It's always the outside loop first, in this case I row. It's always the row first. then the column. So we don't even really need to think about, oh, which element am I dealing with? No, it's the outside row first, then the inside row, inside column, or for loop. First the row, then the column, every single time. Right, so that's going to be equal to our input box. Now, input box is a string, so we're going to say string to int, because our array is an integer. Input box. Let's make this a bit bigger. All right, our heading can be class attendance. Well, what am I saying? Call class attendance, and we're going to ask enter number of students for. Let's specify what grade we're dealing with and what class. So for grade, let's say then for grade int to string. What's keeping track of the grade? I row. So we can say I row plus 8. Plus 8. Why am I saying that? Okay, this is optional, by the way. It's not compulsory. We're just making our input box look a bit more neater. I want to say, right, you are entering students for this particular grade, but my row is going from 1 to 5. I'm not looking for grade 1 students. I'm looking for grade 8 students. So when I row is on 1, we plus 8. That means we have grade 8. When I row is on 2, we plus 8. That means we're on grade 9. Right, so that's all I'm doing over here, just showing what grade we're on. Let's move to another line. And what class are we dealing with? That's easy. We just say call, and because it's a char, we don't even need to convert it. We just leave it like it is. And then the last parameter of our input box, we're going to leave blank, of course, for the user to fill in the details we want. And that's it. This is going to fill our array for us. First, it will start with the first row, which will be our grade 8s. Then, just for the grade 8s, it will loop 3 times inside here, class A, B, and C. So 3 input boxes will pop up for the grade 8s. Then once the inside loop is done, it will go back to the top of the outside loop. I row will become 2, which we know is our grade 9s. Then for our grade 9s, it will loop 3 times again. So 3 input boxes will be presented for class A, B, and C for grade 9. Once the inside loop is finished, again, we go back to the outside loop. I row becomes 3, which is our grade 10s. And it does again class A, B, and C all the way up until grade 12. All right, so I suppose we can give that a try. Keep in mind that nothing is going to display now because we are just filling our array. We haven't displayed anything yet, but let's give it a try nonetheless, just to see what it looks like. So enter the number of students for grade 9. Oh, that's a mistake. That's a mistake on my part. We don't want to start with grade 9. That's just a aesthetic error. Instead of saying plus 8, I should have said plus 7. There we go. Enter number of students for grade 8, class A. So let's say there's 20. Then it should ask me, yes, grade 8, class B, 25 students. Grade 8, class C, only 12 students pitched. Then it moves on to the next set of loops. I row now becomes 2, so we're dealing with grade 9, class A, all over again. So for grade 9A, there was 24 students. For grade 9B, there was 32 students, and so on. This is going to carry on until grade 12, class C is done. So I'm not going to go through all of it. I think you get the idea. That's now our array done and dusted. So we can move on to doing our simple calculation. Okay, before we go, if you practice your one-dimensional arrays, if you just get back up to speed with that, you will see how similar this is to that. We're just adding one extra layer of complexity. So for our normal one-dimensional array that we learned in grade 11, we will still have one for loop. And our input boxes will look exactly the same. The only difference here is that we'll only be specifying the column. We won't be specifying a row for a one-dimensional array. When we're working with our two-dimensional array, we still have the exact outside. We still have our outside column. Our outside loop. But we now must add a second inside loop, remembering that it's always the row first, then the column. And this again would be the same, just that we must now add an index for the row as well. So it takes a little bit of getting used to. Like, you need to practice doing this 2 or 3 times. But once you've done it 2 or 3 times, it's going to be in your head, because we know that it's always the row first and then the column every single time. That doesn't change, so you don't even need to think about it. When we're specifying our indexes, it's always the row first and then the column. You just need to remember that. All right, so going back to show totals. Okay, now what we're going to do is we are going to do a simple calculation using our array of data. The principal of the school would like to see how many students have attended school per grade. So he doesn't want to see class A, B, and C. He just wants to see, all right, grade 8s, this is how many students. Grade 9s, that's how many students. So that's what we're going to do for him. Now, when we display from an array, we basically use the exact same loop structure as we used to fill the array. So yes, another nested loop. But it's not a bad thing, because we know that our nested for loops for arrays is always the row first. So it's quite simple. So we're going to make our variables I row is an integer and C column is a char. And now we can begin. For I row is equal to, and that's 1 to 5, do. Just like in the previous one, I'm going to keep track of my begins and ends. All right, for C col is equal to A to C do. Oopsie. There we go. We're going to keep track of that one as well. All right, nicely spaced out and organized. So what we'll need to do here is we need to add up the total number of students per grade. So we're going to have an integer over here called I total grade. And that's going to keep track of them per grade. Now, we must keep in mind that the first row, I row, our first loop, is telling us what grade we're on. And the inside loop is telling us what class we're on. So we want to keep track of the students per grade. So at the beginning of each grade, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set I total grade, see, is equal to 0. Because once we've worked out how many grade 8s there are, and our loop goes back to the beginning to start with grade 9, we don't want to keep adding. We want to start at 0 again, because now we're starting fresh for grade 9. And then for grade 10, we want to start fresh again. So as we start each grade, the total for that grade must start at 0. Here we're going to be taking each class, because once we're inside the inside loop, we're now dealing with each class individually. So we're going to take each class from the array, because that's where the number of students is stored, and we're going to add it to iTotal. So iTotal grade is going to be, we're going to add on to it. So iTotal grade plus ARR2 attendance, and what index, what element. Again, we don't really have to think about it. We know that it's always the row first and then the column second. That's it. Simple as that. What this is doing now is, it is, by the time we're done with this inside loop, which loops 3 times from A to C, we would have the total grade 8s stored in iTotalGrade. And all we need to do is to display it. So before we set iTotalGrade back to 0, we're going to display what we have over here in red output. So we'll say number of students for grade, and we'll tell them what grade we're dealing with. That was int to string I row plus 7, just to get the number of the grade that we're dealing with. Plus let's add a colon there just to look nice with a space, and now we will display int to string I total grade. Good. So for each grade, we will be starting the counter from 0 again. We will go through each class A, B, and C and add the total for each class from the array. We'll add it to iTotalGrade. By the time these 3 classes are done, we should have a total for that grade. All we need to do is to display it in a line before we move to the next grade and we start again. Once we're done with all 5 grades, it should be displayed. So let's now give it a try. So we can try the whole program now. Let's first read in the students, and I'm going to use an example that I have over here, so I don't have to keep making them up. Right, 34, 35, 31 students for grade 8. Then we move on to grade 9, class A, 33 for class A, 34 for B, and 37 for class C, 35, 34, 33. Grade 11s, class A is 29, class B is 31, and 31 for class C as well. And finally, we're on grade 12. 28 for class A, 30 for class B, and 29 for the last one. Okay, so our array is now populated. It has the number of students for each grade, for each class. Let's do our totals. There we go. Number of students for grade 8, there was 100. And we can see the total there. We can see for the grade 12s, there was at least just 87 of them. That's it, grade 12s, I suppose. This video was looking at the basics of declaring and using a simple 2D array. If this is the first time you're interfacing with a 2D array, it may be a little bit to take in. It might be even a little bit complicated. But all you need to do is do this 3 times. 3 times. This example 3 times over, or even other examples. On the 3rd time, you will have it. Once you have it, you won't forget it.